In this video, we'll talk about properties of numbers. Now, properties are qualities that don't necessarily define what something is, but it's just a trait that holds true after we've made our definition. So let's go ahead and get started with reflexive property. So reflexive property is pretty simple. Anything is equal to itself. In this case, A equals A. Pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy. Basically, anything is the same as itself. And this could be an expression, it could be a number, whatever it is, it's equal to itself. Symmetric, similar to reflexive, but the idea is basically I can rewrite an equation backwards. So if A equals B, then B is equal to A. Or if you think about it with expressions, 4 plus 2 equals 6, and 6 equals 4 plus 2. Both of those mean the exact same thing. Let's talk about transitive property. So transitive property is a very powerful result in mathematics. If A equals B and B equals C, then I can deduce that A is equal to C. Now again, this could be expressions, it could be numbers, it could be whatever, but this will always hold true. If two things are equal to the same thing, then they must be equal to each other. Substitution property. If we're talking about substitution, basically it's saying that if A equals B, then A can be replaced by B. And this is one we use all the time without really thinking about it. So if we said A equals 4 plus 3 and B equals 7, a lot of times when we're simplifying expressions, we'll just go ahead and use the 7 instead of a 4 plus 3. If we were simplifying the expression 2 times 4 plus 3, we'd say, oh, that's actually the same as 2 times 7. That's substitution property. We're refiguring what value to use or what simpler expression to use. So let's talk about the identity properties. Now in this case there are two types. There's multiplicative and there's additive. So for multiplicative, A times 1, anything times 1, is itself. The identity comes from the idea that I didn't change anything. They are still the same thing. And with multiplication, that happens when I multiply by 1. So if we look at additive, A plus 0 still equals A. Again, started with A, ended with A. That's the identity. I've changed nothing. And for addition, that happens when we add 0. Next will be inverses. So while we're talking about multiplication and addition properties, which in this case, this is another one that has an addition one and a multiplication one, and they're similar but slightly different. So let's start with the addition one. A plus a negative A equals 0. Inverse comes from the idea that I'm canceling it out. So if I add anything with its negative, I get 0. Likewise for multiplication, if I multiply something by its reciprocal, so in this case if I have A times 1 over A, that equals 1. We're undoing things. We're essentially undoing the multiplication is what's happening here. So this would be a reciprocal, or also known as a multiplicative inverse, this 1 over A expression. This property, multiplicative property of 0, pretty straightforward. It's the idea that if I take a number, let's call it A, times 0, I always get 0. Anything times 0 is 0. Pretty straightforward property, but it's worth mentioning. Commutative property. So again, this one it applies to both addition and multiplication. The idea is you can change the order of things without affecting the overall product or sum. So A plus B plus C is the same thing as C plus A plus B. It's all addition. I can change the order however I want. And likewise for multiplication, if I have x times y times z, well, I can rewrite that as y times z times x. Since it's all multiplication, I can rewrite it any order I want. So commutative works with the idea of moving things around, or to commute as a way to remember it. Associative property, or sometimes it's also known as grouping. And this one gets confused with commutative quite a bit because it kind of acts a little bit similar in some regards. So the idea is if I have a plus b plus c, but I'm doing the b plus c first, well, that's the same thing as it's all addition if I was to do a plus b first plus c. Notice the order did not change between the A, B, and the C. The only thing that changed is I decided, oh, I'm going to group the A and the B first. And we do this all the time without really thinking about it. If we were adding up three numbers, well, we'd probably add two of them and then add the third. And it doesn't really matter which one we pick. We just added two of them first. And we can do the same thing with multiplication. So if we have x times y times z, and say I wanted to do the x and the y first, well, that'd be the same as if I did the y and the z first. Like so. And that's associative property. And a way to think about it is the grouping, and that's why I put the parentheses around it, is that we're thinking, okay, I'm moving parentheses around. Even if I'm not physically writing the parentheses, I'm just grouping things differently.